Hello, this is RICKY, the Android guy. Alright guys, so today we're going to be going with the iPad mini versus the Samsung Galaxy Tab 2. Seeing how these two compare and which one really is the better bang for your buck, as well as the best overall tablet for the 7-inch. Now this is the first of all of the series that we'll be doing on the new 7-inch tablets comparing to the iPad, and see which one really is better and how far along iPad has come for their first 7-inch. So first of all, let's go to just screen size and specs, and of course look and feel. So in terms of screen size, we have a 7-inch display versus a 7.9-inch display, so obviously the iPad will be a little bit bigger. In terms of aspect ratio, unfortunately Apple still stuck with a 4:3 ratio versus 16:9 ratio, which their new iPhone has, and which should have been with this one. But the reason why they went with this was one thing very simple, that if they would have had a 16:9 ratio, they would have no apps available for it. So they decided to go with a 4:3 ratio and make all of the original iPad apps work for it, which was not a bad decision. The bad decision was keeping the same resolution of the original iPad, which was by far the worst, and especially by today's standards. These two are both the same resolution of 1024 by 640, I believe. I want to say that, I'm not entirely positive about that, but I believe they're both the same resolution at that. The problem is, of course, since the iPad is bigger, you get more pixelation. We'll see more of that as we go into these different walkthroughs and everything like that. But you can see that on the Samsung, text is much clearer compared to the iPads. We'll go over that in a book though more clearly so you can see that. In terms of weight, the iPad is a few ounces lighter. In terms of noticing it though, you don't really notice it too much on these. Now when compared to like the Kindle Fire, both of these are considerably lighter compared to it. But between these two, it's really is ounces. I mean, you can easily hold either one of them very easily in the hand, one-handed. And both materials are really nice. Definitely with Samsung, it has those curved edges, so either way you hold it, it just feels really nice. With the iPad, it really feels nice when you hold it landscape. Portrait though, it can kind of be bothersome because of these very thin bezels. And I've just accidentally hit it a couple of times and moved around a couple of times just by accidentally touching the side. So I have noticed that on different things when I'm like on a website or anything like that, or a page for a book, it just automatically flips it over. So it's one thing I didn't like is how narrow these sides are. It's basically, it feels really more preference to hold it landscape, which is of course not typical for Apple. They usually prefer portrait for their OS. Now in terms of cameras, of course you do have a 5 megapixel on the back and a 1.3 on the front here, whereas here you have a 3 megapixel on the back and a 1 on the front. So in terms of text, let's go right into that just so you can see more of what I was talking about. And let's go into the same book. And one important thing I want to let you guys know is I could not get these fonts at the same because of the resolution of the iPad. I wanted to make it as fair as possible, so I did make the iPad one a little bit bigger in comparison to the Samsung, because making it smaller, it just really looked a lot worse. So just kind of showing you the clarity difference on these two. And definitely, even you can see this one is a smaller font on here and it's very sharp. If I put this one to a smaller font, I wanted to show you this first because I think this is more equal. But if you look at it at a smaller font, it really starts to get pixelated. And not only that, but from further away, it's harder and harder to read. Almost every letter is jagged, and it's definitely noticeable more so in person. So I would advise you to like look at a book and see it. It's a lot more jagged, and so it's definitely noticeable even from afar. Of course, in the zoomed in, you'll even notice it more. But it's one thing. Also, whites are whiter on the Samsung compared to here, where it's more of like a beige tan. And we'll notice that in the color saturation. The iPad is a bit more color saturated compared to the Samsung in this case. So in terms of web browsing, let's go to the web browsers. And it's just loading up on the Samsung, the iPad. It's saved from the last time I had it open, and I'll make sure both are okay. And right now on the Samsung, it's just loading. So first thing I wanted to note is, while the Samsung one's still loading, is that you'll actually see something very interesting with these two web pages, and that is that when you have them both, you actually don't get more screen that the iPad offers, which is really interesting. Because their resolution's the same, the web browser actually does not get you anything better on the bigger screen, which is amusing, because Apple did that whole demonstration of how their screen size gives you more real estate. But it actually doesn't, because on web pages they actually go by more so the resolution. And even in this case, when they're at the same, let me make sure they're at the exact same, when they're actually at the same starting point, so I'm putting it at the phone news, you actually get more on your web page than you do on here. So I think that was really interesting. From the zoomed out view, you'd be surprised at the clarity again. Now, I don't know if this will be able to focus that well on it, but I will try. But the clarity on the, let me move that more to the side. The clarity even from this view is apparent, that even from a zoomed out view, you can actually see details slightly even sharper on here. Now, if we zoom in, you'll definitely see it. So first, let's go over pinch to zoom though, for you guys. So pinch to zoom is very good on both. Of course, on the Samsung, on Android, you always have an advantage, and that is that you can, of course, put flash on there, and that's a really nice feature to have the ability for. And again, just on the clarity, let me try to move this to the side so you guys can see that web pages just turn out to be a lot clearer on the Samsung. Now, obviously this is better to see in person. I don't like to zoom in too much, because then, no human eye will actually see, will like put it to your face. But what I've learned is when you have it at an arm's length, and a full arm's length, you cannot notice the clarity difference. But as soon as you bend your arm and put it in closer, you'll immediately notice the clarity difference. So, not going by Apple's Retina display thing, which, that's one thing that I learned a lot of people do not realize. This is not a Retina display. Apple never labeled it as a Retina display. I had a lot of people tell me oh, well, isn't it a Retina display? No, it's not. No, it's not at all. It's actually Apple's, it's one of their poorest displays compared to the market that they've ever done. Now, I say that not because they haven't done a display of this kind of quality before, but when comparing to the market, they generally, are pretty good. And in this case, they've actually got the poorest display out of any tablet on the market right now for a 7-inch. And let's do that. And again, we can just kind of see the clarity difference. And in terms of how much we get in the screen, again, we actually get more of your web page on here compared to here. So I find that interesting because, Apple said their real estate was going to give you more of a web browser, and it didn't really. So I just find that kind of interesting that happened, as well as obviously the clarity difference is really, really noticeable on images like this, where it's just very clear on here and really jagged and just not that clear. You have to, you do at times have to squint, and I've had to do that several times when using the iPad. Okay. Now, in terms of music, let's play the same song. Oh, and if you want to know how bad the resolution can get, now this is obviously to an extreme, but if I would go out even further, and this is one thing I always find funny, is that, you know, Apple claims like, oh yeah, there's so many apps that aren't made for the screen on Android. This is an app that isn't made for it on Apple. Now, this one is made correctly for Android. But the thing is that there's a lot less times, even when you have the screen that was made for an Android phone, they look a lot better in comparison to this, which just looks really horrible. And if you talk about pixelated, this definitely looks pixelated. So that's one thing that I just definitely I laugh at when Apple does that. Not only that, but you know, when you have to type on an app that's not made for it, it still uses the regular keyboard. On Apple, it will actually make you use a keyboard within this little box. So it's really poor, and when they upscale compared to when they upscale. So that's one thing that I definitely like to point out, because I think it's one thing that Apple grossly leaves out of all their conferences, which I just find really in poor taste. So now let me play the same song.
Take away your stress, mean that sincerely. Problem solved, never mind that. Girlfriend see your bag, be like, where you find that? Until you DIE, invisible set bracelet, see clearly. Take away your stress, mean that sincerely. Problem solved, never mind that. Girlfriend see your bag, be like, where you find that?
Okay. So, in terms of the two, Samsung will have the better sound. It's just very apparent. They both have similar clarity, but definitely when it comes to being louder, the Samsung easily prevails over the iPad. Now, let's go to video. Now, this is something I found very hilarious. So I'm going to turn down the volume first of all. But I have to show this to you guys, because I thought it was really hilarious when I noticed this. And that is, with the same video, even though the iPad has the bigger screen, because of their lack of 16:9 ratio, the Samsung actually has a bigger video. So I found that really interesting that that would happen because of Apple's lack of screen resolution. So when you actually see it, that Apple actually the Samsung's a little bit taller in comparison to the iPad, which I just find really hilarious that that is true. It just was more and more apparent as I kept doing these demos, trying to compare which one was better in terms of video. So let me go over that. Alright, now in this video I'm going to try to point out to you the things we've already kind of gone over I've asked multiple people about this, and this is the overall thing. Apple does have a little bit more vibrant color on the video. However, the Samsung has a much better clarity. Because it also has a bigger screen, or not a bigger screen, but actually a bigger video screen. That's going to be a really important thing too, is that it's just a much sharper image. And it's definitely apparent that when we looked at things like hair, details, text, it's much clearer on the Samsung. So that's one thing that I had asked 4 people on this, and everyone agreed that that was the case. That this one it has slightly better color. This one's going to be much sharper in comparison, as well as you're going to have besides having much sharper, it's just a nicer screen in terms of being able to have the full screen instead of only half the screen. And again, the fact that this video is actually bigger than this video, I find hilarious, just because of their poor choice in aspect ratio. So yeah, of course, for those people that always say, oh, well, can't you make it bigger? Well, yes, you can do this and then lose more than half the video. So that's idiotic. Alright, so that was on there. And now let's go over the camera. So in terms of camera, you guys probably won't be that surprised. It will definitely go to the iPad, just newer technology on board. So the color reproduction is going to be a bit better, as well as, let's see. So the color production will be a bit better. Overall, this actually is not doing the best job of showing you on the camcorder, I'm noticing, but the color reproduction is slightly better on the iPad, as well as the clarity definitely stands out more. This is not fine, and it's because this one does not have a touch to focus. It's just merely an autofocus. So that's definitely going to be a big thing that goes into it. Now, when it comes to gaming, of course, it will go to the iPad. Just it's a bit better when it comes to gaming, especially for the processor, as well as the graphics built in on it. It's just going to be a bit better. You know, this is not an NVIDIA. The Samsung does not have a high-end graphics card or processor for gaming, so it will go to the iPad when it comes to that. Also, battery life. Battery life will also go to the iPad in terms of just having a little bit more longevity compared to the Samsung. You generally last about 9 hours compared to about 7.5 to 8 hours on the Samsung. So generally you'll get a bit more of a longer lasting battery life with the iPad mini. About an hour average, I would say. Now, in terms of extras, it'll easily go to the Samsung, just for not only having extras in terms of like software extras, so you have like mini apps that you can use on top of your apps, which can be really useful, but also, of course, for having the hardware extras. So on the Samsung, you're able to expand the memory, which you are not on the iPad, as well as you have an IR blaster to use as a universal remote control. So these kind of extras just definitely go a lot further compared to the iPad, which, of course, as we all know, never offers extras built in. You always have to get everything separate, and it just really is becoming apparent more and more. Like with Apple, you don't get anything with your product. You get the product and that's it. With Androids and other devices, you actually get extras built in on the device. Now, in terms of price point, it's no competition, of course. The Samsung goes for $200. I believe even for the Black Friday sale, it's going for like $150. So a huge difference in price compared to the $330 with the iPad mini. All right, guys, so let's tally them up and see which one wins. All right, so for look and feel, it will go to the iPad mini. It's just it is nicer that it's slightly lighter, and the look of the little bit bigger screen is nice. Even though in terms of actual usage, it doesn't really come in handy for being bigger, I do like that it's lighter and thinner. So we just have to give that to the iPad mini. In terms of web browsing, it will go to the Samsung. Although both are very good for web browsing, the iPad is more and more shows its poor resolution when it comes to having the bigger screen with the not so good resolution. Even if they just would have made it 1280 by 800, I think it would have blown the Samsung out of the water. But the fact that it was just such a poor quality resolution, it just went nowhere in terms of screen quality. Not to mention, of course, with the Samsung, you can still add Adobe Flash to give you a much better web browsing experience. In terms of music and movies, it will both go to the Samsung. Better speakers built in, and definitely when it comes to just a movie watching experience, you get a much better look simply for the 16:9 ratio, as well as, of course, the resolution again plays a way better part in terms of clarity. When it comes to the camera, it will go to the iPad. Newer technologies in there, guys, can't deny it. It's just better in terms of pictures, especially clarity in pictures. In terms of gaming, it will go to the iPad. The Samsung is not a gamer's tablet. I've said this in other videos. It's really, you're going to want to go more for the Nexus 7 for that purpose if you want to go Android. However, if you're going to go iPad, of course the iPad mini, you're going to go with a smaller screen size, and so pick the iPad mini for gaming. In terms of battery life will go to the iPad mini. On average, it has an hour longer battery, and sometimes even an hour and a half. So pretty decent battery overall, just lasts a little bit longer compared to the Samsung. In terms of extras, it will go to the Samsung, of course, just because you actually get extras, whereas the iPads are notorious for never having anything that you can do with. So you always have to get adapters with the iPad, whereas Samsung just has stuff built in. In terms of price, of course it will go to the Samsung, having $130 less. You can get pretty much every accessory you could want for the Samsung and have a complete solution, whereas the iPad, you just get the iPad. As well as the fact that it's going to be dropping down to like, I think, $50 less come Black Friday. It's just really insane how good of a price that is for just a tablet that's right almost on completely on par on a lot of levels, if not better than some on the iPad mini. Conclusion. Alright guys, the conclusion, you have it. Tallying them up, the Samsung wins by 1. Now this is very close, and I want to point that out, that this is very close. Although the Samsung won, it is very close with these two. And honestly, I didn't know if the iPad would win this one, simply because the Samsung is the oldest 7-inch tablet of the year now. So you have to give it credit for lasting this long and still having that good of a product. Every other 7-inch tablet has come out after it. The Asus Nexus 7, the iPad mini, of course, and the Kindle Fire HD. But all in all, the Samsung Tab 2 has just remained a really good one for the price and really good quality overall, guys. So I do give it credit where credit's due. The iPad mini is a great 7-inch tablet in a lot of ways, but in terms of overall and the categories that we always go over here, the Samsung won by 1. So it was very close, but Samsung has stood a good amount of the test of time when it comes to its competitors. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. This has been RICKY, the Android Guy.